call, you good to go? Great.
So lights are going to
We'll do a tail slate.
Lights will come on.
I am speeding.
Shooting right.
Yeah, we're rolling.
Okay, folks.
Lights.
Come on
A rat ran across the rafter.
Uh-huh.
You remember? You saw that
Uh-huh.
too. That impressed.
This is slingshot? Was he using slingshot or a throw?
Throw, I think. Yeah, but that was impressive.
But I have seen him with a slingshot. See a squirrel up in the tree, reach down, just grab a rock. You and I would search for the perfect rock that had just the right. He just grabbed a rock, had his slingshot out, and that squirrel was lunch.
Yeah. Are you waiting on us?
Yeah, I was just listening to you talking about squirrel killing school.
This is where
It all began.
All of it started here with this great hole in the ground. It began right here. Funny thing how life works. Jack and I grew up in North Chicago, about a half a block apart. We're not brothers. I knew him, he knew me, but that was about it.
My mother, Mary, and Pete's mother, Gutrin, were best friends. They worked together in a library in Chicago.
My mom died when I was 3 years old. Gutrin died in 1937. Jack's dad left/divorced Mary about that same time frame. After my mom died and Jack's dad was out of the picture, Hugo and Mary decided they wanted to be a husband and wife.
And we were overjoyed when Mary and Hugo got married because now we were a family. That was a big, big deal. I think probably more for me because I had a alcoholic father and now I had a stable father who loved me and provided a role model of what men and a father should be like. So it was a big deal. Hugo and Mary loved wildflowers. So every spring, Hugo and Mary would head for the Ozarks to enjoy wildflowers. And I don't recall that Pete and I were ever invited.
Dad loved these hills. He was an accomplished botanist and an accomplished ornithologist. And so he would describe the Ozarks in terms of trees and birds and flowers.
Mary and Hugo fell in love with the Ozarks, and particularly Ozark people. They loved their honesty, their integrity, their work ethics.
So in their travels, Hugo and Mary met Miriam and Genevieve Lynch, remarkable in their own right, and they just happened to own Marble Cave.
Colorful gals in their own right had been here at the cave almost 50 years when Hugo and Mary met him.
I was just mesmerized by them. They took care of the cave, they served meals, they had people stay overnight, and they loved my mother. I just felt like we were a part of their family, and they made my mom feel that way. And she was their first guide, so I just practically lived with the Lynch sisters.
Miss Miriam took care of the office. Miss Genevieve would be the tour guide. They were phenomenal ladies. They really were. When Hugo and Mary came back from the Ozarks this was in the summer of 1949, they had an announcement for us that we were the proud owners of a cave.
We felt like we'd died and gone to heaven. We had our very own cave to go explore.
My friends all thought we were nuts. Nobody up there knew much about caves or cared.
It befell Mary the job to operate the cave. So she was the cave manager. Hugo was the visionary, but he couldn't join her. He had to stay back in the Chicago area in Evanston to sell vacuum cleaners to provide us with a cash flow that would keep the cave afloat because we were losing money in the cave.
I remember more drives than I would care to even remember of leaving home in Wilmette. And she knew she wouldn't be coming back for 5 to 6 months. And the first 200 miles she would cry.
She was a strong lady and very much in love with Hugo, or she definitely would not have done it. Their partnership was just really an unusual one. Their skills complemented each other. Hugo was the visionary. Hugo was the creative side. Mary brought a sense of good taste, the work ethic, and guts. So the combination, Hugo and Mary's skills, made our success possible. When we got a chance to come to the Ozarks, I don't think we had any idea what fun we were in for.
Here we were, city boys, paved streets and running water and sewage and police and fire and street lights and garbage pickup and telephones and electricity, and the list goes on. Of that list, none existed.
Growing up here in the Ozarks was, first of all, I'm a hillbilly, and you can imagine what it was like to have to ride a horse to work every day. Just all of the things that would go along with sleeping outside under the stars at night. There were wonderful nights with nothing but just Milky Way all across the sky. And then, of course, during tornadoes and storms, you had to get out of the house, but we didn't know that, so we would have to go outside and make an adventure out of it.
Every day was full of some new experience. Pete tells a story about killing a squirrel and not knowing how to prepare it. We boiled it.
It was no good. So we ended up with Mars candy bars for dinner that night.
Pete and I loved Marble Cave, and any opportunity we had to go cave exploring, we took it. And we talked our parents into giving us a Christmas gift of a raft at one year so we could cross the lakes in the cave. Another Christmas, we asked for an aluminum ladder so we could go through a hole in the ceiling at Blondie's Throne and discover a new cave. It was just a boy's paradise.
I grew up in Springfield, Missouri, which is where my mother was from and where she grew up. So I did have some acquaintance with the Ozarks, not like I do now. One of the things that I remember, because I was a campfire girl, I went to campfire camp. And we came over here on a bus to go through Marble Cave because that's what was here. All of us thought we had the most handsome cave guide, but we don't know who it was. I don't know who it was. I would love to think that that cave guide was Peter Herschend.
The first year of the lease, we had a grand total of 5,000 visitors to go through the cave, which was a record number. They had never done anything like that.
I think I started guiding in the cave in '57. So you would go down, and normally you would go to the waterfall, either go over the top and then come back up that way, or vice versa, just for variety purposes.
On the initial cave tours, going to the waterfall room was a very big challenge. In fact, the people on the tours were given special clothing. They had coveralls with leather seats on, so they could slide on the rocks and the mud. And after 505 steps of clambering down to the waterfall room, that was the major problem.
The cave guides, on the other hand, had 4 or 5 trips to go through the cave, and if they went back to that platform, it was 505 feet.
Because 505 feet down and 505 feet back up is a pretty good hike.
The game we played as cave guides was to hold people as long as we could in hopes that some more people would come, and we would reduce the number of times we went down 505 feet and came back up 505 feet. So Pete and his friend Roy dreamt up stories that they could tell.
We had to do something to entertain without making it look like we were waiting, which is, of course, exactly what we were doing.
Pete was a pro at stalling.
Known for taking some of the longest cave tours ever, but there's a real method to his madness.
We invented Stone County time because things run a little more slowly here.
So you have to adjust your wristwatch. He had people in stitches.
They're taking their watch off and are setting the doggone thing back 5 minutes. I don't know what would happen if we'd sat there for 2 hours. They'd have been 10 minutes behind. You know, it was impromptu theater, but it was a lot of fun, and it killed a lot of time.
Yep.
My dad was one of the original employees here at Silver Dollar City. His name is Lester Vining. My dad and Uncle Bert and Rex always saved the heavy work in the cave until the boys got here on spring break, Christmas break, whatever.
In the cave, not only was no electric lights, all of the steps to take you down 505 feet were wood, and the wood rotted out every couple of years. So one of the very first things that Hugo felt we had to do was replace the wooden stairs with cement stairs.
There was no such thing as a ready-mix truck. It didn't exist, and you couldn't have gotten the concrete down here anyway.
I can't think of anything too much that one could do that would be worse for your body than to carry sack after sack after sack of cement to the waterfall.
If you've ever picked up a bag of cement, it's 80 pounds, carried it down there, and then mixed it with the water in the cave.
3 to 4 round trips in a day would be very normal.
And the thing was, they would get the boys to carry as many bags of concrete down into the cave as they possibly could get. And Pete and Jack would be saying, "Are you sure this is the way it's supposed to be?" And they'd, "Oh yes, this is the way. We do this all the time. We do this all the time."
And as we were tearing down the wooden tower, Bert Llewellyn, big strapping man, was swinging a 15-pound hammer, and at one time he swung at a 2x8 and missed. So when he missed, his momentum carried him right off of the very top of that tower out into midair.
He left claw marks with his fingers and claw marks with his toes where every time he hit a landing, he tried to catch onto it. But I guess he went all the way down.
But his injuries were slight, and again, we were really blessed to get through that one as well as we did.
We'll be fine, because I'll just stick to the same marker. All right, Uncle Jack. Are you studying your notes?
Yeah.
Let's talk about Fanabelle for a little bit. I mean, she, from what you told me last time, she blew you away. Just amazing, amazing. And then you discovered she had a daughter.
As I mentioned earlier, I was terrified of girls all the way through high school. I never had a date through high school. And when I met Sherry's mother, I fell in love with her. She was 50 years old, and I just thought I never met anybody like that.
My mom started working for the Lynch sisters in the cave, working her way through college. She loved that cave, and she loved the Lynch sisters because it was her opportunity to be around two ladies that were really well educated. So through the years, Mom guiding here would take me into the cave, and I fell in love with it. It was like my playground. It was my home.
When she checked me out for 6 months and decided I was okay, she introduced me to Sherry.
Mom had called me and told me that I needed to come by and meet the new owners of the cave She was very impressed, and she said, especially their son.
And I was weak in the knees. I needed a date with that girl so badly.
He was leaning against a tree post with his leg crossed, and he had these great big boondockers on, which I didn't think matched his mother's queenly look, you know, and I thought, well, my mom sure thinks he's great, so we'll see. And I was not that taken right off the bat.
So I said to my friend, Vanabelle, if you'll loan me a couple of horses, maybe Sherry would go to the river for a picnic lunch if we went by horseback. She said, sure, I will.
And Mom and I, in cahoots, got together and decided I would really find out what this guy was like.
She sets me up with Old Paint. And Old Paint had not been ridden in 3 years, and Old Paint did not want to be ridden at all.
He gets on the horse, and when he gets to start down through the neighborhood, down through over the hill, and the horse rears up.
Yeah, the air. Remember, I've never been on a horse before.
That horse was determined to take him off, and there was not a doubt in my mind that horse was going to take him off.
I'd been a wrestler in high school, so I put a full Nelson on his neck.
He leans down around the horse's neck, and he's half hanging on.
And I looked under my elbow, and there was Vanabelle and Sherry on the ground, tears running down their face.
That's when I thought, maybe that's not classified as integrity, but there's something there that I've never seen in anyone, ever. And that's my husband.
Sherry and I got married here in this very spot right behind me at the Liberty Bell in 1954. It seemed like the right logical thing for us to do.
The cave already had held so many wonderful experiences for us of caving and guiding in it and everything. So it just couldn't have been a better setting.
Yeah, I was best man and
chair carrier.
It wasn't the chairs that worried me, it was the organ. That my good friend Roy and I carried a foot pump organ down. So we manhandled it down, and while you took off, very selfishly I thought, and went off on honeymoon, it was left to Roy and I to have the honor of carrying it back up out of the cave.
Come to think about it, I owe you.
Big time.
Are we good? Yep. Here we're gonna do the same thing we did with Jack. Almost the same questions, but there'll be a couple different ones.
But I'll do my variation on it.
You will do your variation.
Yeah. You know, in the early days of Marble Cave, we had no money to do marketing in the commercial sense. So one of the first ideas we came up with was an underground radio broadcast from deep inside the cave. And we went back down to the lakes. We were trailing a cable. And do you remember knocking the rock off?
Very well. I'm glad you forgave me for that. I knocked a rock off about half the size of Pete's head, and it hit him square on the middle of his head, and he bled like nobody's business. I tried to take a little clay and kind of stop the blood, but that didn't work. And thank you for forgiving me.
But can you, on the surface, of course, they're hearing this is a radio broadcast, and there's Mom up there saying, what's going on?
Hugo came up with the idea of having square dances. He convinced square dancers from Kansas City to come down because of the 48-degree temperature in Marble Cave, and we built square dance platforms and bleachers for people to sit on. And a lot of people knew about Marble Cave as a result of Hugo's square dancing.
Another marketing idea came about really by accident. We set the world's underground altitude record for hot air balloons.
It occurred to us that it would be great to open each day at Silver Dollar City with a balloon ascension. So Henry Pickard came to Silver Dollar City. We said, why don't you fly in Marble Cave? So we hauled his basket and balloon all the way down, and they gathered the top of the balloon together, tied a knot there, and put a blasting cap underneath it. Well, Henry tied an overhand knot instead of a square knot, so that when he and John Corbin got to the ceiling of the room, the overhand knot came loose, which then opened the entire top of the balloon, and he and John Corbin, his passenger, hit on this steep hill and rolled all the way down the hill into the pond down here, and nobody was hurt.
The line that Don Richardson came up with was world underground altitude record
Yes,
established in Marble Cave.
yes.
And the audience, the people out there, kept hearing, oh, it's Marble Cave, Marble Cave.
We inherited three guys who were incredible people. Rex Johnson was a World War II vet with only one eye. Lester was an incredible cave guide and maintenance man, and Bert, the man who knew how to do a lot of different things. Between the three of them, they had 7 years of education. So it was not education, but rather the practical experience that they brought from not only living here, but also having gone to the logging woods in California and Oregon.
Imagine Pete and Jack in their teenage years coming down from Chicago into an area that I've described to you that was male-driven. They're suspicious of others when they came into the area. What were they really up to?
They weren't going to take orders from Jack. It just was the culture of the Ozarks. But so I think Jack may have learned his style of how to get people to do things without ordering them around, because he had to work with those guys who would just refuse to do whatever he asked.
At lunchtime, all of us would get together and have a problem of the day. And the problem that was our biggest was 505 feet of stairs.
The visitors to the cave had to slide and clamber down 505 steps down to the bottom of the cave in the waterfall room. Then they had to turn around and spend probably 4 hours at least getting back out of the cave.
It became clear that we had to solve that problem or we were not going to be financially successful. So we all got together around lunch and said, how do we solve this problem?
And then the vision came along to make a tunnel from Blondie's Throne out to the surface and make a train to haul people back up.
The cable car became the open sesame that allowed this business to grow.
And so we were about to undertake the digging of a tunnel through solid rock with no experience.
We had to blast a tunnel at just the right angle this way and just the right angle this way.
The most dangerous thing we had at that time was that if you had drilled a hole and you filled it with dynamite and it didn't go off, now you have to dig it out by hand, and the cap is still in it, and how we got through that without killing somebody was just a miracle.
After the construction of the cable train tunnel, there was a major problem. It wasn't a straight shot back up the hill here to the top of Roark Mountain.
I said to the guys, we got to figure out somehow to get this cable train to turn a 157-degree turn.
There were some engineers that said this couldn't be done. But the attitude of Ozarkian people, and especially Bert Llewellyn, said, we'll do it.
And he said, we just put in shivs between the track that pick up that cable, and we'll feed what ended up 21 shivs around that curve, and the cable just feeds on it and feeds off of it. No education, but smarter than the engineers.
When people ride on this cable train today, and all my 1,500 miles on it, all of us were using the technology that this fellow that didn't finish high school came up with.
One of the days when Jack was out working on the cable car, I was in the office very pregnant with Ron.
Jack was inside one of the cars working on I don't know what. That car was sitting at the top of the tunnel. In other words, it was here, but it was held in place by the cables. The braking systems weren't fabricated, were not on it.
I was on the back of the train and asking Lester to lower me slowly down so I could look to see whether we were going to hit either wall or the ceiling.
The hoist cables had been paired poorly.
When the hoist starts up, it throws a little slack, and when that slack came out, the cable clip let me go.
Of course, now the car with Jack in it is in free fall, and it's going to go hell-bent for leather down to that solid rock wall.
First I thought, oh, this is interesting. I've always wondered what it felt like just before you die. Now I know. And then my second thought was, oh, shucks, I'm leaving Sherry pregnant with our second son, Ron. That's a bummer. And my third thought was, I ought to do something to try to save my life.
He got on the floor, feet first, tried to hold on to the chair braces.
Those seats were welded on, and they came free, and he rode from the curve to the bottom of the cave.
And of course, he hit, they're estimating 35, 45 miles an hour.
We hit hard.
And I get a phone call. Sherry, there's been an accident. Now don't, Jack's okay. Now don't get scared. Don't get scared. I said, stop, just tell me what's happened. Tell me what's happened.
When I woke up, I needed 57 stitches in my head. I'd crushed 3 discs in my spine, and I'd broken my ankle in 5 places.
And I'm looking at his head with blood pouring out of it. His foot, he didn't even know that the bone was completely out of his leg showing. And all he's worried about is this blood, and I'm worried about that leg.
When they got me to the hospital, which was no small trick, getting me out of there, the doctor said, you'll never walk again.
I darn near lost my brother, but I didn't. And he lived, as he said, lived to dig another day. He's that kind of tough guy.
In 4 weeks, I was back helping pour concrete.
Oh, he was back much shorter than that.
I had my friend at the gas station vulcanize the end of a truck inner tube. And I'd strap that inner tube on and cover up the cast so I wouldn't get any cement in it. And we were back in business in relatively short time.
This ingenuity of this man that I had been married to for 62 years.
Jack Herschend realized right away that cave guides had an hour between tours. and that was way too long to loaf around. So he built the Slantin' Sam's Miner Shack first. And we would take and encourage people to go over to Slantin' Sam's Miner Shack while we're still building Silver Dollar City and go to the Miner Shack and see water run uphill and do all the stuff.
That was the avowed purpose of Silver Dollar City, was to gather people together to get them to go through the cave.
And the cave was $1.25, and Slantin' Sam's was only 50 cents.
Yeah.
So I wanted to get them that way.
In those very early days in 1950, 1960, when buildings were being built, when the street was being designed, the belief was that quality was incredibly important in everything that was done.
The idea of what is now Silver Dollar City was really a combination of several different ideas that came together. Russ Pearson is one of those people that God sent at the right time, and Russ brought a scale model of what we eventually then built.
The angle of the buildings, the design of the walkways is critically important to the overall guest experience, and those early decisions truly impact the guest experience for every guest that visits us today.
Both Hugo's original concept and then Mary took heart to it was to build into the hills a village that would have been an 1880s type village.
He and Mary had gone to the ends of roads, gravel roads everywhere, to see a blacksmith or a weaver or a potter.
When I originally started with the National Crafts Foundation, I came over and was in an office with Mary and Jack. I would travel to Mountain View, Arkansas, just an unbelievable amount of hill music there.
We had some very, very basic crafts. The blacksmith shop was there.
And then there was a young woodcarver from down in Arkansas, Pete Engler, that knew that people loved to see craftsmen work. He brought hillbilly wood carving to the park. The blacksmith, Lloyd Heller, would use iron to make things.
Hugo's thought was to bring all these crafters to Marvel Cave, where it would be easier for folks to see what they were doing.
You could see the interest because people, if there was a demonstration at a certain time, you'd see people begin to gather.
When we found that we had a lot of interest in Silver Dollar City and people were coming just for Silver Dollar City, not for the cave, it didn't take long to visit 8 buildings, and we needed something more to entertain people.
We were always trying to create new shows. We started out with the Hatfield McCoys, and we started out with Marshall Hooker and just the old gunfights. In fact, Russ Pearson brought those guys from Hollywood. They were stuntmen, and some of the shows were shooting guys off of roofs and letting them land in hay bales and things of that sort.
We started doing small, just kind of off-the-cuff country shows, and we had Dirty Dan Diggins, and then the Hatfield McCoy idea came in, and we kind of improvised at the start.
My brother and I have had a wonderful partnership because I am an extreme introvert and he's an extreme extrovert. And so when the concept of street shows was born, it was just natural that Pete would star in street shows.
Did I know I was going to be a performer when I graduated from college? Absolutely not. I have a degree in business administration. So does Jack.
In the Hatfields and McCoys, he was Zeke Hatfield. And of course, very important girl in his life, Jody, played Sarah Ellen McCoy.
It's neat to get to do.
So in the midst of all this, you somehow met Pete.
Yes, I did.
You say something to that effect, maybe.
Yes, I can. Where do you want me to start?
My brother lived in Branson, and he'd just bought a beautiful red Triumph. It was a convertible, a little sexy little car.
Great little sports car, or anybody who knows sports cars, they're fun.
And he wanted to impress Jody, who worked in the general store, with his brand new car.
She was staying at the old Branson Hotel in downtown Branson. And so she was waiting out front in her long dress.
Down to her ankles, and no jewelry, and had on a Silver Dollar City outfit.
But along came Peter Herschend in a little Triumph, two-seater.
He went up the hill. He turned around with a quick U-turn. He came down to where I was sitting on the porch.
Pulled up in front of the hotel and said to her, "You want to ride out to the city?"
My mother said, do not get in the car with strangers, ever. And he was certainly a stranger, so I did not get in the car with him. I said, no, thank you.
She turned me down.
Well, I think it was later that day that she looked up and saw this gentleman walking across the park.
I said, whose car is that, Ed? And he said, that's Pete Herschend's car. And he said, well, he sure is somebody that all the girls like, so you be careful.
She didn't listen.
We met at the mirror in the dressing room. I was blacking out my teeth. And he came over to the mirror and blacked out his teeth because the dressing room had one mirror and two little shower stall-like places to be. And so that's when I said, hi. And he said, hi, I'm Pete. And I said, I'm Jody. And we went out. That was kind of it.
This was in a show where Jody was playing Sari Ellen. And Pete was playing Zeke Hatfield. And they were to come and meet at center stage. They knew each other. They obviously were fond of each other, but they'd come running up to each other.
Zeke and Sari Ellen liked each other. And he had brought her a flower.
The script called for Zeke to give Sari Ellen a flower, or as Zeke called it, a fleur. And Zeke was supposed to hold it behind his back, and the line was, I can still do it,
Hey, Sari, I got you a fleur. And I said, oh, I ain't never had no fleur before. And so he gave it to me, and we were holding hands, and I was smelling my flower.
So early in Silver Dollar City, when we were doing shows, I was holding hands with my future wife and didn't know it.
Parker? Sit here for a second, Rick, where you're just kind of looking around.
My name's Rick Todd. I started working in 1967. I was a 15-year-old teenager, and I started working on the parking lot. And the only reason I came to work here is I got fired from a job down on Indian Point. I sunk a houseboat and got fired, so came up here and got a job as a parking lot attendant. Didn't have very many parking lot attendants because we didn't have many cars. My very first day of work, they put me up the front of this parking lot and told me nobody could park in this roped off area without a red card. Now, I didn't have any right why, but that's what they told me. I'd been there 15 minutes and a white Thunderbird rolled up, and this lady with gray hair said she needed to park in there, and I said, you have a red card? And she said, nope. I said, can't let you park in there. She goes, well, let me introduce myself. She goes, I'm Mary Herschend. And I said, I'm Rick Todd. Good to meet you. But I'm sorry, without a red card, you can't park there. And she never said a word. She just kind of looked at me and smiled and went over and parked. And by the time I got ready to go to lunch that day, small crowd, everybody knew about what brand new parking lot attendant had done, including my mom.
I'm June Ward. I started working at Silver Dollar City in 1968. My first job was in the general store, helping sell the products that they offered and helping with the mail. Then by the fall of 1968, they just transferred me here to Brown's Candy Factory, and I've been here ever since learning how to make candy.
I got really fond memories of Jack and Pete back in those days because Mary ran the company. There's no question about that. And Jack ran the cave out to the parking lot. That was kind of his job. And Pete ran the city. And that was kind of his job.
It was really hard for me to know who was in charge, who owned the place, because everybody worked.
Mary was very much an environmentalist and very much into the theme. And she made sure that every detail of everything that was built looked like a stage set. And if you cut a limb off of a tree, Mary Herschend fired you on the spot.
The very first time I was out here in the parking lot, I was up there where the trams parked, and one of the trams had hit one of the trees and kind of tore a branch off. And I was watching the parking lot and everything going all right, and I saw where they broke off a limb, so I grabbed the limb and I just pulled it, and it just stripped down that bark like you do. What do I know?
So I'm pulling this down there, and I'm tugging on it, and I finally get it stripped off, and I stripped that bark all the way down, but I got the limb. And I turned around, and it was Mary. She couldn't have been 10 feet from me, and she fired me.
We shared that honor. We were both fired by our mom several times.
I go find a phone. I call Ted Miller. He calls Jack, and I say, I got fired. And he'd say, okay, well, go to maintenance or go home for a couple of days. Just stay out of sight.
She allowed us to come back. Good thing.
I remember seeing how the operation worked, and I used the example when someone would ask of a beautiful old grandfather clock, that Jack was the kind of inner workings, the part of the clock that kind of made things turn and tick, and that was his particular gift. And Peter was the very public side, the bright faces of a grandfather clock. And Mary, in her own way, were the hands of the clock. She would tell what time it was. And two completely different kind of guys. You know, Jack was a fairly serious guy, but you could obviously tell very smart. And Pete was high energy all the time.
Jack wore a uniform, cave guide uniform, and when he wasn't busy in his office, he would be taking cave tours and doing whatever needed to be done. And then Mr. Pete, he would put on a costume and he would go out and do street shows.
Jack and Pete were multitaskers to the extreme. Jack would rush off and go into the office and write paychecks, and Pete would then go down to the candy store and start stocking shelves.
And if the shop was busy, you'd look up and he might be helping you sell candy. We got him to do about everything except wash the kettles. He didn't master that.
It just seemed natural that an 1880s town should have a train. And we started looking for where we could acquire a train.
I can't speak for the rest of you, but I suspect you haven't bought too many steam locomotives in your life, and I had bought exactly the same number.
Had some concern for a train because this is very hilly country, and trains don't do real well on hills.
We found a wonderful one in upstate New York in the winter.
So how much of the train and how well he really knew what he's buying, I'm not sure.
I carefully walked around the locomotive. I kicked the iron tires, very bad idea. And the only other thing I could think to do was slam the boiler door open and closed, because that's what you did when you were buying a car.
Here came the train, having been guaranteed to climb a 5% grade.
We had all kinds of problems with that train. We had no experience, had nobody there that really knew anything about trains. And on the very first trip, we got the track laid and got the train all fired up.
We got a run at the hill, and black smoke is coming out of the chimney, and sparks are coming out of the chimney because the engine is really pulling hard.
And the train was out of control.
We couldn't get it stopped, and the engineer jumped out of the cab. Jack was in there with the engineer.
He jumped out of the window and rolled off the hill, leaving me in the cab, not having a clue what to do. When it got to the grade going up, it finally stalled out and started coming back. And when I passed Ty Smith, I said, "How do you stop this thing?" And he said, "It'll stop in a little while," which it meant it finally run out of coal.
It looked just like a cartoon, just settled in the bottom. In addition to having trouble with the train, it constantly set fires.
We set the woods on fire because of all the sparks coming out of the chimney. So every time we tested it from there on out, we had to have small boys out in the woods with wet gunny sacks putting out the fires.
The flues and the steam train boiler leaked.
Well, that does two things. One, you lose steam, and two, it puts the fire out. Train's not going to run very well. The solution was my brother.
Every Friday morning at dawn, they would grease me up from the waist up because I was the smallest of the folks working here at the time, and they would give me a stinger from a welder, and I would go in the firebox, very hot, and try to weld up the flues to get by for another week.
He would then weld, leaning inside the weld the doggone flue end closed. And he probably did that half a dozen times a year.
The train robbery, which is now famous and is a famous part of Silver Dollar City, was born out of necessity because the train needed to have a full head of speed to get up the 5% grade back to the depot.
And so you have to have the locomotive stopped and fired up and build a lot of pressure in the boiler, and which means you've got a lot of steam ready to go.
While it was building up that head of steam, we needed some way to entertain people.
This was a perfect stalling technique. We could rob a train for as many minutes as it took for the engineer to toot his whistle and tell us that now he was ready to go. Then magically the robbery was all solved.
Some of my proudest moments are street performing and robbing trains. In fact, showing train robber on your resume was quite the thing.
Early things that we did oftentimes came from necessity. The street shows at Silver Dollar City were necessary to provide entertainment. But as we went along, the creativity of the Silver Dollar City family became very evident.
It was recommended that we bring in some rides, some flat rides. Rides you might see at a carnival or a theme park. And both Jack and Pete thought this is really going to be a good idea. And Mary said, no, we're not going to do that. And they could not understand, nor could I, why wouldn't you want to do this? It's a great idea. I said, no, it's not unique, it's not distinctive, it doesn't fit the Ozarks. We're not going to do it.
And thus was born rides that we built ourselves rather than bought them off the shelf.
Back in the early days, we were all the engineers. Jack, Pete, didn't matter. We'd build anything.
The Fire in the Hole is right behind us here.
The Blazing Fury, Flooded Mine.
And a ride like Rube Dugan's Diving Bell, which was a ride that took you under Lake Silver, supposedly. We had a two glass, and we had bubbles coming up between the two glasses, so it looked like you were underwater. Very, very creative stuff. And I have a lot of pride in the creativity that went in to make Silver Dollar City truly a one of a kind, an original.
Don Richardson had the idea for writing a story for TV Guide magazine. And the story idea was a real hillbilly reviews the Beverly Hillbillies. Don was really, really good at generating publicity, generating stories. And he found a guy named Junior Cobb from Mountain Home, Arkansas. Remember, the Beverly Hillbillies was the #1 show on television at the time.
The Beverly Hillbillies.
And Junior had never seen a television set.
You didn't have electricity, so it didn't make any difference. He saw it for the first time, and his comments were rather classic. Don got in touch with Paul Henning, the creator, producer, director of the Beverly Hillbillies. Don suggested, Paul, what would you think about the Beverly Hillbillies coming home to Silver Dollar City as part of the series? Paul bought it.
Hey, look, we've come into the city limits. Does that sign say the population is 28? Sure does. Why, it's pretty near doubled since we left.
Yeah, seems like there's just no such thing as a small town anymore.
And they moved the entire production company here for 1 week of shows. They did 1 show a day, 5 shows, and massive crowds came to watch.
When the Beverly Hillbillies came to Branson, it was a very fun time. They came 2 or 3 times prior to the actual show.
It was amazing. We had every day on Park, we had full entertainment, no shows of our own, just filming with the Beverly Hillbillies. And it just created a whole new image for Silver Dollar City. They immediately went from just being a little hillbilly town somewhere in the Ozarks to really being on the national scene.
It was reflected in attendance. It was reflected in reputation. We still feel the impact of that today.
Wait, sorry. Maybe not that.
Oh, that should not be cut. Now you know why Pete did the acting, and Pete was in front of the camera, and I was back in the back room during all of this. Oh, gracious.
Back in the mid-'70s, Jack and Pete decided that we were going to build another park. They wanted to duplicate Silver Dollar City. And I actually asked Jack, I said, why do you want to do this? It's a lot more work. You know, why would you want to get into this? And his answer was most unique. He said, I've got a lot of people here that have been here a long time, have worked here, and they need a place to grow. They need a place that I can promote them.
In 1975, we purchased Gold Rush Junction in the Smoky Mountains of Tennessee because we needed to find business that was closer to population centers. It was a beautiful location. There wasn't a great deal there in Gold Rush Junction, but that over the next 9 years, we converted into Silver Dollar City, Tennessee.
Actually came from Silver Dollar City in Branson to start this park back in '76.
And we grow it from 107,000 people a year to about 750, which is okay, but it's not great, and we needed to be great.
Then we heard that Dolly Parton wanted to build her own theme park because she wanted to employ her kinfolk there in Sevier County.
A young man by the name of Terry Garrison was a friend of mine from Blue Eye, Missouri. Terry introduced me to Dolly, and so I knew her, and she had mentioned that she wanted to do a theme park here in the Smokies, and never thought much more about it until on the Barbara Walters show, she just announced one day, I'm going to build a theme park in the Smokies called Dollywood. And of course you can imagine what kind of terror that created.
We figured we couldn't compete with her. So Sherry and I flew out to Denver to meet her. She was in concert with Kenny Rogers there. And I had heard numerous people say, very difficult lady to do business with. She's tough. So I went with fear and trembling. And Sherry and I got to the room where we were to meet. Here came Dolly Parton, walked in the room, slapped her hip, and said, I would like to be your partner. That's how hard it was to strike a deal with Dolly Parton.
When we met, it was almost an instant relationship. She loved Jack and Sherry, and it was just so warm and personable that before the meeting was over, she let them know, yeah, I really would like to do business with you guys.
Dolly turned out to be one of the best partners we've ever had. So we went down there, she came in, we started the meeting. She pulls out steno pads, several of them, and starts talking. 3 hours later, I hadn't said a word. I was just taking notes from different ideas she had of what was going to be Dollywood.
This is not a passive environment. This is a very raw, hands-on, experiential opportunity.
Jack's a manager, Pete's a marketer, Dolly's an inspirational leader, and the combination of that really changed the dynamics for the marketing, the product, the brand, as well as for all of the employees, and it really is a dream come true type company.
So on a daily basis, there may be as many as 16 to 20,000 people visiting our resort hotel, the water park, and the theme park. And then on an annual basis across all of our properties, we're entertaining over 3 million people.
She delivers 3 times more than she's contractually obligated to. Things like being available to make television ads, to be available to open special events, to be there to ride a buggy through Dollywood so people can see her. She was just a princess.
Every town always had a center, a focal point. In the case of Silver Dollar City, it's that Wilderness Church right behind us.
The Wilderness Church really had its beginning in 1869, but as far as the Herschend family is concerned, the story started in 1946 when Hugo read about a log church schoolhouse down on Bear Creek, about 15 miles north of here, and that stuck in his memory.
He said to Bert and Lester and Rex, go find this church. Go find this. See if it's still there. It was still there, but it was about to become firewood.
He got there just in time to save it. He had no idea what he was going to do with the logs, but he purchased them for $100 and hauled them up to Marble Cave, where we stored them for 7 years before we built the church here.
The church was one of the first buildings that actually was built.
And the Wilderness Church, with its log structure, says something about the work ethic of folks here who made everything. Their homes, they made their lye soap, they wove their clothes. So all of these things are represented here at Silver Dollar City that we find here throughout the hills.
Jack and Pete and Mary knew that they didn't know everything. And they therefore decided to surround themselves with people who maybe knew more than they did in certain elements. And they found individuals to help them think through processes and to think through the designs of buildings and the placement of buildings and make some really critical decisions early on.
We took an extension of that and said, we really need an outside board, because as we grow, our opportunity to make a big mistake grows with us.
And everybody was scratching their head thinking, why would they do that? They own the company, they build it, they sweat, and yet they all agreed that was the thing to do. And there were a number of times that Pete and Jack wanted to do something, really wanted to do something, and the board said no. And we're all kind of looking at each other going, that's really difficult. And you know, I get to thinking, if I own this company, would I put the power and authority in and I don't think so I would. It'd be hard for me to do that.
Jack particularly shared with me one time about the fact that, and I recognize this too early on, that he didn't have to be the smartest guy in the world. He just had to find the right people to be around him to help things happen.
And fast forward all of these years, we still have that culture where when we start to tackle a particular project, whether it's in any one of our regions or it's across the company, we will go find individuals who know and are experts in that particular topic, individuals that will help us make top-of-class, best-in-class kinds of decisions.
Years ago, we got a group of people together to write a mission statement. And it starts out with recreate memories worth repeating. And most importantly, it ends with do everything within Christian values and ethics. And I think that's a manifestation of the culture, not being pushy. We didn't start out with a God statement. We ended it with a God statement.
You told me I ought to work for you.
And look here, you did it.
I do.
Bless you. That's sweet. Where do you work?
We do have the best operating staff of any park in the United States of America. Disney is, of course, bigger. Six Flags is bigger. That's not what I'm talking about. You can buy bigness. You cannot buy greatness.
Silver Dollar City and our entire corporate culture is unique and different. And a lot of people say, well, it's like a family. It is a family. We treat each other like we're family. We care about each other. I mean, I grew up here, you know, from the time I was 15 years old, so, you know, I'm 50 years.
I've been with and around the company for over 50 years, and I think it's about the culture of a family and feeling like you belong, and everybody has it to some degree.
I was accepted. I belonged somewhere. I was somebody. It meant more to me than I knew how to express.
Their whole concept of being involved in the community, they've done so many things for people that no one ever knows about. It's one of those classic stories about, you know, no one cares who gets the credit as long as something happens. I really liked growing up here because I knew that there was a base here and there were people here who were honorable, who were intelligent, and who wanted things done right.
We celebrate who we've been because that impacts where we're going. And we know that to be where we want to be 5 years, 20 years, 30 years from now, we have to remember the core foundation that this company was built upon. It's part of what has allowed us to be a thriving company today, and we know that that projects us into a growing and exciting company for years to come in the future.
Our crafts program here at Dollywood is really important to us, and we've developed an apprentice program to ensure that we're bringing new folks that are seeking out the opportunity to come at Dollywood to carry forward the craft work.
And as long as you have employees that are interested in what they're doing and they love what they're doing, this company will continue to prosper.
I've been blessed to know the family for a long time, and the Christian side of them and the moral side of their philosophies is what really will be the legacy. That will be what will carry through because they've affected so many people's lives.
Hugo gave us a great gift. He genuinely cared about people. Genuinely cared about people. And that has been perpetuated through an organization now of over 10,000 people who genuinely care about each other. And that's the core of our culture.
Silver Dollar City is never about what it is. It's not about buildings and rides and taking maintenance and things like that. Silver Dollar City is always about its men and women. That's where the culture of this company resides. That's the heart of Silver Dollar City today. And you know, 20 years from now, if Silver Dollar City can maintain that same heart, then it will do just fine.